I'll give you photos of Brother Adam. Here we go. So this is David Kemp. He's a bit old now. He's in the early 80s, but he used to be a young man working with Brother Adam at Buckfast Abbey. And he shared some photos with me. So that's him inspecting a colony at the home apiary at Buckfast. This is the grafting shed. And it's incredible how neat and tidy it is. I wish my apiary looked like that. And one of the things David Kemp was saying was that Brother Adam realized that the future was in breeding. They'd already got everything else as good as it could get, really. So it was all down to the breeding. And he said, what everyone says, you get quality bees, you get the colonies to the right pitch at the right time for the honey flows, and the rest is in the lap of the gods. And more Buckfast, so that's their flatbed truck that they used to take hives up to the moor, up Dartmoor for heather honey. That's an out apiary with their bizarre roofs. They were kind of like gable roofs, but they had this, they were designed so that if you turn them upside down and put them on the ground, they didn't rock around. I think it's a bit of a lot of effort for not much gain, in my opinion, but there you go. And they all had these boards going up to the entrance, which I think might have been something to do with using clipped queens. And if they swarmed, then maybe the queen could get back in, or maybe it's easier for the swarm to return. I don't know. But that's David. You saw the photo of him currently. Well, that's him as a young man working at Buckfast, honey harvest and raising queens. One thing he said about the queens, he said they had Italian bees, but when they became very yellow, they used to turn everything into brood and they'd starve, which I think is something that we recognize now, is that perhaps Italian bees aren't necessarily the right ones for us. But he was saying that there is a strain of Italian bee that was actually not yellow, it was a kind of brown color, and they were the ones that Brother Adam used. And here we go. Yeah, so he would overwinter many bees up at the mating station in Dartmoor, and it was pretty bad weather up there, and that was a test of the survivability. And just for those of you, some may remember this, I don't know, but honey didn't used to be in glass jars, it used to be in tin pots, and that was David Kemp doing that, putting them in. There's some contraption there, and they'd go into these tins, which is quite cute, I think. But if I can rabbit on a bit more, but I think maybe that's a good place to stop, because unless you want to hear a bit about Manuka honey, but do you want to do questions and answers, Ari?
Yeah, let's move on to some questions and answers. And
do I stop sharing the screen now? Is that what I do?
Yeah, it's probably best to do that. We can spotlight you, maybe.
Yeah.
And yeah, so there's.
I haven't sent everyone to sleep.
No, maybe we can take some questions about Manuka honey as we go through.
Yeah.
So Sam, did you want to go through the questions that we've got?
I have unmuted myself. Yeah. Do these commercial beekeepers tend to graft to make queens, or have you seen them use Nicot or gentle queen rearing kits?
All the ones I've seen, they graft. Nearly all use a Chinese grafting tool. Some don't, but most seem to use that. I've not seen anyone using those Nico system, but there's no harm in trying, is there?
No. I've tried queen rearing myself and grafted a few myself, sort of thing, and that has worked. And I've taken queen cells and put them into nukes and stuff, and started a new colony that way this year as well. So, is there
any reason for them particularly liking grafting rather than other approaches?
I think they can. I think they're doing it at scale, and I think you can probably knock out more you can probably just do more queens that way. I think that might be the reason, but maybe it's just familiarity. That's what they're familiar with.
Yeah.
One of the things, incidentally, that I quite like about the plastic frame, that one that you saw at one of the first slides, it's quite a pain in the ass to get it drawn and nice because you need a flow on. But once you've got a good drawn frame of comb on a plastic frame, it's really easy to graft from because it's black, which means the larva stands out nicely. And also it's a hard bottom to the cell. So when you slide the grafting tool underneath, it just easily picks up the larva. So I've found them to be great for grafting. Well, before I had a plastic frame, I would mess up my grafting a bit, and my success improved enormously with the plastic frame. But
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
Jeremy, grafting with a paintbrush, 00, you're not likely to put it through the bottom of the cell.
no, that's
And
true.
you can pick up the larvae really easily.
Yeah, I've tried that, and Peter Little down in Exmoor, that's what he uses. He calls, what's it, a sable treble O or something.
Yeah.
I tried it, but I think I'm just not experienced enough yet. I'm only about 2 or 3 years into doing this, and I found that I had to kind of break the edges of the cell down. I used to sort of squish the edge of the cell down and then go in from the side to scoop it up.
Yes, that's what I do. Break down the top of the cell with the back end of the paintbrush.
Yeah.
And you haven't got so far to dip.
Yeah. And also what they used to do at Buckfast is they used to cut the cells down. So they'd cut right down, so you only had about 2 millimeter of cell left, and then they'd take them out that way.
Well, it depends on the scale of it.
Mm. Yeah.
Oh, I was interested when we were talking just before we let everybody on about what you saw sort of generally about all the beekeepers you saw and how gentle they were with the bees. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah. I noticed that first when I saw Mike Palmer in Vermont, and I was working with his guys. They're all insane. I mean, they wear a veil, but they don't wear. They're just in the t-shirt and shorts, and they're getting stung. About every 10 minutes, someone yelps as they get stung, but they just carry on. Whereas I was there in my bee suit, my full defenses. But no, that's something I noticed. Mike Palmer was very keen on when he inspects his colonies. Any frames that get removed go back in the same order, and when he puts boxes back on top of other boxes, he's got a bee brush and he brushes bees away. And I guess it makes sense, because if you get one colony agitated, the alarm pheromone gets into the air, and it's going to agitate the next colony, and you're just inviting trouble. But I kind of expected people who have, like in Mike Palmer's case, he's got about 1,000 colonies, which is a lot. You kind of imagine that they're just sort of slamming boxes on and just moving on, and not at all. It was very gentle, and it must work. I mean, it must just simply be, if you annoy your bees, you just have a harder life, and it's just not worth it.
Some more questions?
Yep, from Dave Thomas, and it has been answered in the answers as well. Do these guys use syrup in their mini mating nukes when they use them? And from Chris, I use fondant in my aphids inside a cut cone box with a few holes punched in the lid. Prevents bees drowning in syrup.
Yeah, Peter Little uses fondant. Most of the others seem to use syrup. The biggest queen maker I met was it was at Oliveira's honeybees in Orland in California. He's a nice guy, and he's friends with Randy Oliver, but they make an insane number of queens. It's almost obscene how many queens they make. He's got queen rearing in Hawaii and California, and he also works with Albert Robertson in Canada, who does these things called Saskatraz bees, which are supposedly Varroa hygienic bees. But he makes over 200,000 bees a year, some for himself and lots for sale. He sells a lot of packages. But I was asking him about how the hell do you do that many? I mean, he's got a lot of staff, but he invented a machine that, because he said what we used to do is just pour syrup into a mating nuke one at a time. But he's now made a big tank which has about eight sort of spouts coming out of it, and a conveyor belt comes along, and you get about 8 mating nukes lined up at once, and they all simultaneously get syrup squirted into them. So that saves him a lot of time. But I don't think it makes much difference. They need something, don't they? But I think fondant probably less messy.
And less likely to spill as well, probably as well. So,
Yeah.
And stop bees drowning. So, and ready for another question?
There's one from Chris. I think
Yeah. When we do beekeeping talks, we get a lot of questions about Manuka honey, and is it worth the cost?
Oh, right. Excellent. Well, I should have done another 5 minutes, shouldn't I? Okay, Peter Bray, who owns Airborne Honey in New Zealand. It's been in the family forever. You know, he's about a 3rd or 4th generation. They used to run a lot of hives, but now they're just a packer. And he knows everyone in New Zealand beekeeping. He's got a lab. He's the only, as far as I know, he's the only honey packer in New Zealand that has his own lab. And they've got an incredible system of they know where every hive is, because beekeepers in New Zealand have to register, and so you've got a sort of a grid reference on a map of where the honey's coming from. And he does pollen analysis, he does sugar analysis, but obviously one of his biggest sellers is Manuka, and it really annoys him because he loves all the diverse, different flowers that you've got in New Zealand. You've got flowers in New Zealand that you don't have in other parts of the world. His favorite honey is something called rata, which is a red plant that grows around about Christmas time, which is their summer. And it tastes a bit like clover honey, but with a slight twang. But people don't want that. They only want Manuka. And he's not very popular with other beekeepers in New Zealand because he slags it off routinely. He uses a different way of categorizing his honey. So there's a thing called the Codex system, which is an international standard. But basically it means if the hives are in the middle of Manuka trees, and you've got 70% Manuka pollen in the honey, we're going to call that Manuka honey, it makes sense, doesn't it? It's like, well, the hives are in Manuka and they're full of Manuka pollen. Great, we'll call it Manuka. The New Zealand government have created a standard which defines what Manuka honey is, and it ain't that. Excuse me. There's 4 chemical tests and 1 DNA test that they do, and there's a list of chemicals that are meant to be present in this thing, and the amount of pollen is tiny. It's you almost need to just drop 2 grains of pollen in a barrel of honey and squirt a few chemicals in, and it qualifies as Manuka, because they've lost the connection between the plant and the honey. They're not testing that. They're testing a load of chemicals. So it's a really bizarre thing, and Yeah, and also on the subject of health, he freely admits that there is no evidence whatsoever anywhere that once you ingest honey, it has any benefit, any therapeutic benefit over any other honey. The only thing, and he says it's really sad because he gets people pulling into his place saying, you know, my mum back home in England's got cancer. I'm told that Manuka can help. You know, what do you recommend? And he said, you just can't help them, you know, because it doesn't do anything. Apparently, it does have unique properties and it has antibacterial properties. But he said about that, he said, well, they've done research on that, wound dressings, and he said actually the Manuka wound dressing isn't as good as the normal wound dressing that hasn't got honey on, but they use the Manuka one if the first one fails. So they use a sort of synthetic wound dressing, and if that doesn't work, then they'll try the Manuka. But you know, basically, his assessment of Manuka is, if you like the taste, great, but you know, you're paying a lot for it, really, and it's no more beneficial health-wise than any other honey. So as you can imagine, in New Zealand, they hate that.
Yeah, Chris has come back with a bit like paying £600 for a designer handbag. That's what we tell our audience.
Yeah. They've also, I mean, it's a massive bubble. What happened in New Zealand was they were hardly making any money from bees. And then Varroa came along and a load of beekeepers went out of business. But the number of hives didn't drop. They just sold their hives to other beekeepers. And so the number of hives stayed about flat, but loads and loads of beekeepers dropped out. And then there was a big boom in kiwi fruit, because all of a sudden, I don't know if you remember, but no one had ever heard of a kiwi fruit. And then all of a sudden, everyone's got to have kiwi fruit. And so there was a massive surge in pollination, and something like a third of all hives in New Zealand were kiwi pollinators. And that massively improved profitability, and that brought more beekeepers in. And then along came Manuka, and that just gone ballistic. They've got about 920,000 hives in New Zealand, and 5 years ago it was about half that.
Wow.
It won't last because they're all driving around in new pickup trucks. Some of them are even using helicopters to move hives, because some of the hives are in quite inaccessible places. But they're not behaving in a kind of frugal, conservative, safe way. And as soon as the price drops, they're just going to be busted.
Yeah.
So
I believe also Shona Blair has said that Australia are starting their Manuka honey business as well.
well, yeah, why not?
We'll move on to the next question from Dave. It's been one of the sort of regular questions here. Do you sell queens?
Do I sell queens? I do, but I'm a bit funny. I quite like I only like to sell queens that I've got spare. I make them, but yeah, I do sell queens. But I don't think I'm happy with my queens, but the people that I would buy a queen off, like I would buy a queen off Peter Little, because he's done it all his life, and he's got a lot more choice than me. And there's other ones like Jed Marshall, and there's a few good ones around. And Murray McGregor started to sell his, but I'll sell queens, but I you know, can't guarantee that they're the best queen you've ever had. They're good enough for me, but I'm a bit stingy because I sort of think, well, I've put all this effort into making this queen. I'd rather have it for myself.
Yeah, and I say our area, we do have Barry Powell down in the Shotley Peninsula, and he has flooded his area with his bees. He's learned from Brother Adam. He has been with Brother Adam as well, so he knows what he's doing down there, doing his breeding and stuff. And he created a very nice queen colonies down there. And I don't know how many he had last year, but I think he had one session where he only had about 3 or 4 take on, and then the next session took about 100. So once again, it's changeable when you graft.
Yeah.
So I've got a question, Steve. So after you've visited all these different beekeepers, what's changed in your beekeeping, in your personal beekeeping?
Okay. Well, one thing, it was my wife helped edit my book, and when she read about how much money Ray Oliveras in California was making, she immediately told me I've got to go and sell nukes. so because I was just thinking, well, this is a nice hobby, and she said, get out there, sell nukes, make money. So I think last year I sold about 10, and this year I'll probably sell about 20. So it's but it's fine. It gives me a home for queens that I make. So yeah, I've started raising my own queens. I've started selling nukes, and I've been pleasantly surprised by the feedback I've had from the people that bought my nukes. So that was good. But I guess, yeah, I got more hives. I mean, I've got 40 odd hives in 3 apiaries. I definitely have a lot of nukes. That was a Mike Palmer thing, but it's nothing, as Mike Palmer says, Brother Adam was doing it, and people way before that were doing it. It doesn't make sense. How easy is it to make a nuke? Like in July or June or something, stick a frame of brood, a frame of stores, and 3 frames of foundation in a box, shake in some bees, stick a queen cell in there, and chances are by August it'll be booming, and you'll need to split it into 2, and then you'll be taking 2 nukes through winter, and it only costs you a frame or 2 of bees. And then it's like, assuming they survive winter, you're ready to go. You know, you can either promote them into a colony and have honey that year from them, or if you had any winter losses, you've got a queen, so you don't need to buy them. So I definitely upped my nuke production, not just for selling. When I sell nukes, I sell nationals, but when I make nukes for myself, it's on Langstroths, which is a bit fiddly because I've got 2 hive types, but I don't have national hives. So as soon as a nuke gets big, I have to split it or sell it because I've got nothing else to do with it other than stick it in another nuke.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions?
What, just out of interest, because I don't know what it's like in Suffolk, but in Cheshire where I am, there's quite a lot of non-treaters for Varroa. That seems to be a kind of trend that I'm seeing, and which is fine within reason, in my opinion, as long as you're monitoring, because a lot of people don't monitor, and therefore they don't really know how many mites they've got. And I think if you don't know how many mites you've got, you might as well assume you've got lots and treat. But if you're not going to treat, then you should be doing you know, alcohol washes routinely just to be sure that you're on the right track. That's what Randy Oliver does. I just wondered if that was if that was going on in your patch, the kind of let's not treat our bees type thing.
You got that one, Barry?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that. I'm generally not much of a treater at all, but now getting into thinking about using oxalic. But I think generally people do treat. I do. Yeah, I would say most people. No, not most people. There are others here that are saying they don't treat as well. So
I guess it's your bees, and you know, everyone each to their own, isn't it? Really, but
yeah.
I'm
never sure what's the right thing to do. Or well, from reading your book and reading other things, definitely if you're a commercial beekeeper, you will be treating your bees. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, but I mean, in my book, Richard, Noel, Mike Palmer, and Randy Oliver are all actively involved in trying to raise Varroa VSH bees. You know, the Varroa sensitive hygienic trait. They've like Mike Palmer's just been approached by a university to do a 3-year project using his bees and doing DNA analysis and whatever it is they do. So people are definitely searching for the bee that doesn't need to be treated so often. It's definitely the right way to go. It's just, you know, it's also a bit cruel just to let your bees die. So if they've got a massive load of Varroa, I think I'd rather treat them, you know. But
it's one of those decisions. If you don't treat, you might lose your bees, and you might lose other bees in the area as well. If you do treat, then you've got to keep an eye on it, so you keep coming back to it and saying, well, it did work last time, is it going to work this time if I treat them again? As you say, if you do it at the right time in the winter, you're doing it at the right time next year. But as you said, it changes to the weather, it doesn't change to the calendar.
Yeah, but I mean I mean, you've read that book, Barry, and so you'll know, but it's not just about people making money from bees. Far from it. I asked people about how they got into beekeeping, you know, some of the stories from like disasters they've had, because it's always good to know. I always want to know people's disasters because it makes mine not look so bad in comparison. And believe me, every beekeeper's had disasters, and there's no exceptions to that, really. I don't think, and equally successes, and you know, there's a lot more to it than just this is all about money, you know. And that was another thing that I noticed, was people pointing out wildlife and birds and flowers, and it's not just that I'm a cold hard businessman making money from my bees. They're very tapped into the natural world, and it was an eye opener. But I think it's a bit different in America. I mean, I think the scale is quite frightening in some ways, and I kind of think it can't be a good thing that over half of the bees in America are all transported to Northern California in February to do almond pollination. Sounds like a recipe for disaster, but they're a bit odd.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. So you wouldn't hire an Arctic to move the trucks?
No.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think I don't know. Do we have any more questions?
There's questions saying monitoring is the right thing to do with Varroa, and Jeremy Quinlan says, who wants to join a queen rearing force next year? Is that you running it, Jeremy?
That's right.
So, okay,
Yep.
definitely put the email around.
Yeah, so if people want to drop Jeremy an email, if they want to be on this queen rearing course, that'd be great. And I think I'd like to just thank Steve for his time preparing and writing a fabulous book. Thank you very much, Steve.
okay, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great evening.
That's
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Cheers, Steve.
Cheers.
Yeah.